Woah. Woah never changes. Let's talk about VATS. Fallouts 1 and 2 were tactical games, RPGs, where you would have turns and action points, and it was all very complex, well suited to taking up a lot of your brain power. Fallout 3 was a first-person shooter. However, in order to make the fans of Fallout 1 and 2 believe that Fallout 3 was a Fallout game, it had to have action points. So they put in an action point system where you could basically pause the game and go ahead and target things using a menu. They called it VATS, and it still exists today, and I'd like to talk about what this mashup means, and what sort of results you can expect, and why you might want to design something similar into your own games. I am going to touch on some of the implementation flaws. So this is VATS. Notice that I just missed a whole bunch. So that's VATS. Now, me personally, I use VATS because I am bad at first-person shooters. I've gotten a little bit old, and I'm having a hard time keeping up with anything that moves that fast. So I use VATS to slow the combat down enough that I can actually do some good. Don't point that thing at me, man.
Not that it's an option.
So that's me. I don't use VATS whenever I'm firing on an enemy at long range or even at medium range. I only use it when there's an enemy close up that I can't keep tabs on. Especially common with things like bloatflies where they're small and hard to hit. I literally could not play this game if I was going to try and fight bloatflies without VATS. It would be impossible for me. So it's cool because it gives me the opportunity to fight with an alternate combat system, and I can choose to use that alternate combat system when the primary combat system has gotten a little bit too rough. I think that's a great idea. I like the idea of mixing and matching combat systems. It's not very common in first-person shooters. Most first-person shooters are hardcore first-person shooters. Red Dead Redemption had something similar where you could go into Deadeye mode, and in Deadeye mode you could select a bunch of targets. And that was also pretty cool. But, of course, there are a lot of implementation flaws in VATS in specific. One of the implementation flaws I already mentioned, but I don't know if you noticed. See, I always enter into VATS mode when combat gets frantic and things are close by and I can't keep track of their fast movements. That means that I'm never at range and using VATS. Let me know if you use VATS when you're at any kind of range. I've never had to, but the result of that is pretty simple. Come on. There you are. Perception. VATS is stat-based, and that means that your various stats determine how well you do in VATS. Perception is how well you hit at range in VATS. So I don't need any. I don't use VATS at range. You notice that even using my crappy pistol that has no sight on it, I was never lower than about a 40% chance to hit against a head, against a specific small target. So with a perception of 4, I'm working fine in VATS. I don't need anything higher. And I don't need any high perception for the stuff that's not VATS because I'm manually aiming the weapon. So if I'm sniping someone from far away, I don't need any high perception because it's all manual. The only reason my perception is 4 is because I wanted to be able to pick locks, which requires a perception of 4. If you don't need that, then there's no reason for you to have any perception at all. Now, some of the later perks are a little bit good. Here, and here, but they're not so good that I think it would be worth spending so many of your stat points on perception. So basically what I'm saying is, the way that VATS works means that I don't need a high perception. I'll never need a high perception, and I can't imagine anyone ever needing a high perception. Let me know if you found a high perception to be worthwhile as compared to a high amount of agility. A high amount of agility works great because agility governs a lot of things. It governs how much shots you get, how much AP you get when you are in VATS mode, sure. So if you get a high agility, you can fire more frequently in VATS mode. But agility also matters outside of VATS mode. It determines how well you can sneak, and sneaking is a major component of much of my game. So I have a very, very high agility because there was no reason to put anything into perception, strength, or endurance, so it might as well go into agility. Now the other flaw with VATS is that the VATS system is actually quite deep. There are a lot of things going on. In addition to targeting specific body parts, you also have a critical meter, and the critical meter fills up and then allows you to execute criticals when you want to. And I think that that's a wonderful cinematic detail. But unfortunately, all of those things really are boosted by perks, these perks here. So, for example, if you wanted to have a better VATS fighting system, you would do this and get yourself some better criticals. Or down here you can get one that you can get better more criticals banked. Here's more stuff down here for VATS. So luck is really a VATS-centric situation, with the exception of this. So if you wanted to get good at VATS, you're going to have to spend traits on getting good at VATS. The problem is that those traits don't help you anywhere else in the game, and that means you can't spend your traits on other sorts of abilities. So, for example, Rifleman, that'll help you in both real-time combat and in VATS combat. Big Sail, this doesn't help in combat at all, but if I had spent those 2 points on getting better VATS criticals, I wouldn't have them to spend on my Big Sail. So you got to sacrifice a lot of your more general performance in order to get good at VATS, despite the fact that you never need VATS. The only time I need VATS is when I am getting swamped by small flying creatures or, fast-moving zombies, and I could, in theory, do without it. I could, backtrack and use a widespread shotgun, but what I'm saying is the implementation here is flawed. If you're going to develop multiple kinds of combat, you need all of those combat systems to weave together rather than split apart. A good example of that is the Suikoden series, where you had combat in your party, but you also had combat in cooking, and you had combat on the battlefield using large units, and you had combat with armies. You had all these different kinds of combat. You had duels. And you didn't have to sacrifice your abilities in one of them to get good at another one. You would never have to say, okay, well, I want to be better at fighting on the big battlefield, so therefore I need to be worse at fighting in a team. Instead, you were allowed to be good at all of them. And that was a closed world game. You couldn't easily switch between them, but it would have been well within the limits of this game to add in a bunch of other kinds of systems, a bunch of other kinds of combat, and allow you to freely switch between them, and VATS could be one of those. I don't want to have to sacrifice my quality of combat to have a good VATS combat. I want to be able to switch between VATS and other kinds of combat as my needs see fit. I would have also liked a lot of abilities to switch between other kinds of combat. What other kinds of combat? How about a system where I can actually tactically control the characters in the cities and allow them to fight against the raiders in sort of a tactical battle? How about a system where I can take control of my NPC to get him the hell out of my way rather than having to jump over his head every time he decides he's going to walk through me? There are a lot of kinds of combat that would have been neat, but unfortunately we are never going to see any of them because the only one that they wanted to put in was VATS. The only one they had to put in was VATS. That was the mode for the Fallout 1 and 2 fans. But even though it wasn't really intended, VATS opens up a gateway, opens up a glimpse of the kinds of combats that you could have had, the kinds of alternate systems that could be embedded in a game like this one. That's it. Let me know what you think of VATS, whether you think my analysis is on the ball or completely wrong. Let me hear about anything you have to say about different kinds of combat. Would you have liked a tactical sort of system where you could have had a lot of different kinds of enemies, or a lot of different kinds. Sorry, got distracted by a fight. Would you have preferred a system where you could switch into a tactical combat mode, control all the characters in your town at once, or all of your NPC allies at once? What would you have preferred? What would you like to see? Do you think that just having a first-person shooter is enough? I'd like to hear. That's it.